Swami, thank you for, again, making time. I know we just talked about a month ago when we were focused on the first virus, which was COVID. And now our conversation needs to be grounded on a virus that has been in our space for over 400 years. So I appreciate you for sharing your gifts with us. And I will start off just by asking you, how are you doing right now and as a spiritual leader? And how are you doing as a change maker present in Atlanta during these times?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm sure everybody knows that Atlanta's struggling right now. And it's intense here, just like it is everywhere else. But, I think all of us are worn kind of thin from our current situation. And yet we're all still striving to figure out how to be, a positive, effective part of the solution. So I'm okay. And I want to ask how you're doing as we start as well.
Quite frankly, I toggle between both being tired of the news cycle, but also optimistic about the moment that we are in, toggle with exhaustion and anger, but also trying to take advantage of the moment to actually enact change. And I think that modeling the conversation we're going to have now, it's probably reflective of the conversations that a lot of leaders in the sector should be having. So as much as we can pull and push, use your tools and challenge each other, I think it's the space that we are going to walk in. And I ask for our audience to please chime in with questions, because we are going to model what we think should happen in the sector as much as possible. And I know Swami doesn't hold any punches. So Swami, I would go right in and ask you right now, what does it take in this moment to be brave and be vulnerable?
Yeah, right. I actually think that's kind of what we're being tasked with as leaders. If we talk about, how to be a courageous and effective leader when you don't have all the answers, when we're kind of, in this swirl of uncertainty. And from my perspective, can like contemplative practice and mindful conversations help you do all of that? Because I think the demand on us is higher than it's probably ever been. But I do think that your inner work has a really powerful effect on your outer life. So I would want to talk about courage and personal leadership. Because I think that it is very personal now, and whether it's leadership in your organization, you and I talked about this some before, or in your family and your friends, whether it's, whether you're having these intense conversations with colleagues or whether you're having them at your home, it's still the question about how do you stand in your life? How do you stand in who you are in a way that reflects your own ethics? I think right now, one of the things that you and I have talked about is when it's like we're being forged in fire right now, right? And Habib and I started a conversation at the last pop-up about like when I had asked him about doing contemplative practice and what was it like for him right now. He kind of shared that, look, if I close my eyes, it's just a field of anger, it's frustration and anger. And so using that as kind of a jump off point for this, I feel like that one of the things that that's kind of being required of us is to get comfortable with that discomfort. Right? It's navigating this discomfort that none of us are really that crazy about. But I think all of us are being asked to be able to lead when we want to kind of just clamshell in, we just want to go, it's too much, it's too hard, it's overwhelming, we're worn thin, we're exhausted. And I think that vulnerability, I actually think that it's kind of like a nationwide or worldwide vulnerability that is a possibility now that has not been there before. I think part of it for change makers and leaders, I think a lot of people are afraid to be vulnerable in it and to lead when they don't have all the answers. You know, I just think that it's almost like we're being asked to open more than we've ever been asked before. You know, it's like when you come up against those parts of yourself where you are unsure, how do you kind of soften and open there instead of armoring up and retreating? Because I don't think we have the room to retreat right now. You know, I like to think about things kind of, I like to kind of go global a little bit, pull back from the personal and say, surely this is a time where, if as the human race, where all these things are being churned up, surely, it's gotten so intense, something positive has to be birthed out of this space. It has to happen.
And Swami, building on this time where I would have to acknowledge that in some of the conversations with some partners that have worked with us and with the independent sector and Upswell, that there's this question around paralysis. It's like, when is the right time to start? I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to get called out. This is too political. I don't want to take a stance. There's that notion of fear. And there's also, from the other side, a notion of trust. Like, do I trust you enough, Swami, to be vulnerable?
Yeah.
So what are some tools to unlock that space where we can actually have conscious conversations that we may get it wrong, but we may then learn other perspectives. So what are some of the things that you've seen in your 30 years of leadership in that space?
Well, Habib and I, the other day, we came up with the term changemaker paralysis, because it was like, oh, it's happening everywhere, right? Everybody's afraid to make a mistake or to say the wrong thing or to be, like you said, too political or, and this, I think the paralysis comes from that fear of vulnerability, that fear of, of, uh, of being allowed to be out on the cutting edge of change. And, I think inevitably we're not going to do it perfectly. I think perfect is the enemy of progress. It's like, we're not going to do it perfectly, but if we're willing to really go there, I actually think, and this might be, okay, so I'm going to be a little vulnerable right now. One of the things that I think with changemaker paralysis is, I think the origin of it is different for Black change makers than it is for white change makers. And I know that can be hard for change makers to hear this conversation, because for myself, even, I tend to think of all of us as we. And now I'm saying, okay, but it's a different experience. I think that the experience for Black America is different right now than it is for white America. And as painful as it is to acknowledge that, I think that's part of the vulnerability, is to be able to say, I think the white change makers that I've been in dialogue with are really afraid to do or say the wrong thing. But there's also some resistance to, one of the tools that I always use, I call the arrow of discernment. I say, you've got to turn it back here. You've got to turn it back here and do deeper work and be willing to look for things that you didn't even know were there. Like for myself, I told Habib this story the other day, that one of the things that I think is so paralyzing to people is, how do you have difficult conversations with your colleagues or with your family or with your friends, or, the conversations that you kind of skirt around, and because that it's going to go like this, right? It's not going to go well. Those beliefs are different. And I think that the courage to be able to have some of those conversations is being asked of us now. And, I just, on Sunday, I had a conversation. My mom, I'll give you a personal example, because family ones are often the hardest ones. right? My mom is 93 years old, and I've been trying to have conscious conversations with my mom around race for my whole life, really. And she's one of those, she's good at it, you know. She's a little sneaky at it, like so many people are, not intentionally so, but overtly she would say she's not racist, but it's in there, and it's deep, and it's not pretty. And so on Sunday, I started to have a deeper conversation with her. And I think for myself, doing deeper work over the last couple weeks, really in this, I think we're not just in a civil rights, moment. We're in a humanitarian uprising, because this is a humanitarian issue, right? And so for myself, I tried to broach this conversation with her from a different place. One of my favorite sayings that I think I swiped from the Quaker tradition is, I refuse to be enemies with you. Because I think in difficult conversations, when you go this way, when you're opposed to the other person, you end up like this over and over again, or you end up in this kind of back and forth, I'm right or you're right, or I'm going to outdata you or you're going to outdata me. I know these facts, and I know these facts, and I know these facts, and we're going to fight about facts. And so I think when you get caught in that, you have to go to people's humanity. You have to go to compassion, and you have to try to relate to them from a deeper space of humanity. And that's what I did with my mom. Instead of standing opposite from her, I stood beside her, right? To go, okay, I'm not going to be enemies with you. I'm going to try to have us walk forward through this conversation together as your ally, as someone who loves you, because I do love her.
Right.
Right?
Right. And Swami, I appreciate your vulnerability as always, and I'm using it as a teaching moment. But what I want to ask is what was underneath that? If we were to model that community as an organization, right? How did you model that 40 years of 50 years of bringing the same question to your mom, knowing that the statement of support is actually not the work, it's actually the heart that actually drives the work. So how is that taking out the statement, which you've been hearing, like I'm not a racist, but how do you then trust that there's a shift? What are some of those things that were driving you to be resilient and persistent to the point where we now have this unlocking in the moment, So what are some of those things that can be modeled in organizations as well as in our conversations at home?
Well, I think the first thing was courage. I think I had to get more courageous. And even though when we have those kind of conversations, we're fearful that we're going to risk the relationship, right? That it could break apart the family, or you could come to a place of division. And I think for myself, I think I had to trust myself enough to say that I'm not going to bow to that fear. I'm not going to bow to division. This is not how this conversation is going to end, right? I'm just not going to let it happen that way. And she's tough, but I'm strong. And so I was like, okay, I'm just not going to do that. So I think the courage to have a deeper conversation was on me. And then I also think there was an element of compassion for her that might have been missing in me before that, where I tried to understand, like I was kind of born, and in my very young days that we were in Massachusetts, more liberal, outside of Boston, all this stuff. And then we moved into the deep South when I was 6 years old. And so I asked her about what that was like for her. I tried to get her to remember her Democratic roots, and to say, how did you, just without saying, how did you get to where you are right now? You killing me. To say, I'm actually curious from a space of compassion. I wanted to know how she got to where she was. And that put us side by side. And so I think that courage and curiosity and compassion were the tools that I used in that conversation. And even kind of a vulnerability where I was like, it's okay with me, whatever you say. I didn't go in with an agenda around thinking it's not okay with you to be who you are. or that I'm trying to change you. I wanted to understand her more than I wanted to change her.
No, absolutely. And I that's a big piece that I hope it's highlighted around. It's not about changing the other. It's just about the collective action that we are both driving at achieving. I do have a question around just blackness and whiteness in leadership right now, because this is the conversation we need to have. Like I said, Swami would need to model it. And you have been leading an organization for over 25 years that has been providing both food and spiritual capacity in Atlanta. How are you making any changes in this time? How are you embracing your whiteness and centering it? And how are you creating space for Black leaders in that space? I think that that's a conversation we should have.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. Because I think it's a courageous question. And I think that it's great to be able to have it. And one of the unique things about Kashi Atlanta is we are extremely diverse. And we're a meditation center and yoga studio, and it's interfaith and lots of different faiths. We're in Midtown Atlanta, so lots of different genders, but also really diverse racially. And so we're pretty unique in that. And we have we have many of, like, our Black yogis will come in and say, any place else I go, it's all white people practicing. Or there's a couple of studios now in Atlanta where Black people practice, but there's not this homogenous, more diverse, all in one room together. And that's always been really important to me. And we've done a couple things over the last few weeks, and part of my own kind of going, oh, I need to empower the Black teachers in our community more. Right. I've always, offered scholarships and done all these different things to kind of pull up the Black community into that. But there's more that I need to know about and that I could do. So like we're giving a whole day over to Juneteenth on Friday. And it's Black teachers and just kind of celebrating the Black community here in Atlanta. Atlanta has such a history in the civil rights movement. And, I had a takeover of my Wednesday night meditation class. I asked some of our Black teachers if they were comfortable with it, to do a program on Black yogis' voices, to kind of share from the Black perspective, because I think, okay, so here's another kind of more personal example, but in our current teacher training, one of the Black students, who is a mom, she's amazing. She's got two teenage sons, a 17 and 18-year-old son. And she shared last weekend in the teacher training that she's terrified to let her sons leave the house. And I thought that was so important for white yogis and white Americans to hear, because I thought, okay, here is an American woman who is amazing. She's deep and amazing, and she's afraid for her teenagers to leave her house. And this is 2020 in a major metropolitan city. I was like, I need to understand the Black experience in a deeper way as a leader, so that I can respond to it from that space. And so, I've just been doing my best to try to say, okay, teach me. I need to be taught. I don't need to be up here teaching as much.
And Swami, we got a question from Joey, which it's a good follow-up to that understanding and deep listening piece. That what happens if in that conversation it shows up as being aggressive and defensive, or there is the trust? Like, how do you still open up in knowing that part of the process of understanding and deep listening may include loss and just grace? Like, what is that? What is the tool? Because I know it's not as easy as we are talking about it now, because that's when we then spiral into data and artifacts you. What are some of the things that you've been modeling that leaders on this call can tap into?
Well, one of the things that I say to myself, like, let's say the arrow is being shot at me. right? Where it's like, okay, you're going to shoot an arrow at me, or somebody's anger or rage is going to come directed right at me. One of the things that I try to say to myself in moments like that is I don't want to be right. I want to do right. Right? I don't want to defend my position. I don't want to be right because I might not be right. Right? I want that openness in myself. I want to do right. I want to get it right more than I want to stand in a place of defensiveness or, it's like when you and I had that initial conversation and you said, every time you close your eyes and you try to touch into the quiet, it's anger and it's rage. And the ability as a white person to be able to open instead of defend is crucial because, people were shocked, right? I said, you should be mad. You should be mad. And people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Nobody says that. And it's like, oh, you should be mad, Habib. Right? But I can't, I don't know. I trust you. I am, that was you and I pretty early in getting to know each other. It's not like we had this huge foundation of hanging out together.
Right.
Right. But it was, no, I know your heart as a change maker. I know you want the world to change. You want all of us to grow in this. And if I trust that in the process more than my own defensiveness or more than how I look as a leader, I actually think that develops authentic leadership. Because if you can see your leader open and curious and compassionate and present with somebody else's pain, that's real. And you can feel it when it's real versus if it's defended and hidden and, different agendas and stuff like that. And so I think if you're going to try to develop authentic leadership, you have to develop that trust for yourself that you're standing in the right place in this for the most part, right? You're standing in a good place because you're trying to do good in the world, but you're not trying to look good while you're doing good. You're trying to look like, I don't know what I'm doing either, but help me figure it out. I'm committed to the deeper issues more than I am to looking good.
And there is I want to make a shout out to Jackie Flores that said a point around that the fear of doing or saying the wrong thing should not hold you back. In the end, it is better to have done something and learned if you're not wrong and do better than to remain silent in fear. And the point where I want to build on that, Swami, is there is, and this happens both in either race or all multi-races, when we are talking about these issues that are so sensitive, that are deeply rooted, that are systemic, in that there are some answers that we wouldn't have, and not knowing could create that fear, that paralysis. So that fear of like, if I don't act, I'm actually maybe doing something right. Can you speak a little bit about, Swami, that this breaching through the fear? What are some ways that people can still act without knowing what the right action is, as long as it's in supporting and dismantling the systems that have permeated the societies for over 400 years?
Well, that's the humanity again. As a leader, you don't want to be void of your own humanity. You want to be able to make mistakes. And I actually think kind of there's a generosity of heart when we see somebody else suffering that we also have to offer to ourselves, right? That if we don't know the answer to something, we have to have the same generosity of heart towards ourselves. And I mean, it's kind of oddly powerful to hear someone in a leadership role say, I don't know if I know the answer to that. I don't know if I know exactly what that's like. It was like when Stephanie said the thing about her kids. I was like, I don't know what that's like. I don't live in that America as a white person, but I want to know her experience, and that curiosity. I'm telling you, that curiosity and that kind of, it's like kindness towards the person who's suffering lets you hold somebody else's rage. But kindness towards yourself lets you hold the space for yourself to grow. And you have to model growth as a leader. You can't just say, I'm done, I know everything. It's like, yeah, you have to be mindful to not, to not say things that are really awful, but you also have to be generous enough to risk some things, right? Like risking the relationship with my mom, or we're having a risky conversation online that's being recorded right now.
No, absolutely. I'm glad it's being recorded, because we have over 185 people that are listening to us right now, Swami. And my next question is, what is one or two things that change makers right now? Because obviously, a very valid assumption is that we have well-intended people on this call that really want to see a better world.
Yeah.
And that comes with burnout. So what are some of the ways that we can deal with that burnout and that stress and that anxiety and that fear? And if you can walk us through an exercise, that I would gladly appreciate it. Sorry, I'm sneaking that in, but that's part of the reason that I really appreciate our relationship. If you could walk us through a light exercise that we could use every day as we keep on chipping on this system.
Well, because you set me up for that one, right? Because because obviously I'm an urban yoga monk. I believe in contemplative practice, because I think it's a drink as you pour kind of situation. And if you don't sit each day in some sense of quiet communion with reverence, that it's very difficult not to burn out. I mean, burnout is inevitable, I think. If you don't have some way of refilling your cup, you're going to burn out. And so I think that the anti-burnout practices I don't know how people are doing it really without doing some kind of thing that says, I got to fill my cup so that when I go out. And I also think one of the things that happens when you do contemplative practices, you turn in and you say, how am I? If I come into my work and I'm already mad and I'm already frustrated, how can I use practice to kind of deal with some of that? So let's do a practice together. We'll do a short one. But yeah, let's do a practice together and see if we can touch into some things and create a little more spaciousness. So if you would close your eyes, I'm going to ask you to do a very long, slow, deep breath while we do this practice. Okay, so the first thing I want you to turn towards is your awareness of your breath. And you should be able to notice how you are. As soon as you notice how your breath is, there's kind of a magical link between the breath and the mind, right? If you can change your breathing, you can change your mind. So right now, if you just deepen your breath, you can kind of get a read on how you are. What are you feeling? What are you noticing? What are you thinking? Can you establish a deeper breath? Right, because one of the cool things about breath meditation is it's a little bit of a bypass for the mind as well. You can go right into the deeper parts of your being without worrying about your thought stream quite so much. Okay, so very deep breaths continuing, deep breaths in and out through your nose. And I want you to see if you can sit in a space of openness. And it can be a big ask right now to sit in openness, because in a certain way, I'm asking you to be open with yourself and allow space for you to feel whatever you're feeling. It's one of the foundational practices is to say, whatever I feel is okay with me. Right? It's almost like I refuse to be enemies with anything in me as well. I don't want to polarize myself from my anger or my fear. I want to allow space for it and befriend it. Because until you befriend someone or something, you cannot develop real compassion. Right? So just see if you can touch into compassion for what you're experiencing, for what all of us are experiencing. It's outrageous. The demand is so high. Right? But just be with yourself for a moment. And whether you're experiencing, rage or anger or fatigue or shame, or just the desire to be numb to all of it, just allow space for you to experience what you feel. And now go back to a deeper breath again. Just deeper breaths in, deeper breaths out. And see if you can touch in to the center of your chest, a few inches over from your physical heart. You know, in the Vedic philosophy, they say that's the heart of your being. That's the heart of your humanity. It's the heart where you feel love and compassion and kindness. And so breathe in and out as if you were opening that. It's okay to feel what you feel, but you don't have to let it define you. Now, just for a moment, see if you can let the idea or the feeling of kindness or love or compassion fill that cup of your heart. This is a quick practice. We would usually take a little longer to get there. But just see if you can allow yourself space and time to be flawed and still be strong. Right? You let what needs to break apart, right? Let your confusion and your fear break apart. Let your fatigue break apart. Right? But don't let it have you land in the wrong place in this experience. Right? So take a deep breath in. Let the breath go out. And just slowly open your eyes. See if you can bring some of that peace and calmness into the conversation instead of jumping right back out. You know, I think when you feel burnout, and I think everybody's feeling some of it right now. I am, right? I'm feeling it. I'm feeling a little crispy around the edges. But when you continue to open to your own experience and still do the next right thing, you know, you start to trust that change is happening. And, you know, all change makers are bridge builders. We don't like the bridge to get blocked. And so you just have to be courageous enough to say, yeah, it's hard to keep your heart open when it's this painful, but that's the work.
And Swami, I know we are almost at time, but I just want to thank you for sharing your gift with us. I see a lot of appreciation from the chat box as well. We really appreciate you walking us through this process, and that change requires sustained bridge building. It requires opening up your heart, and it requires obviously using the tools to breathe when you can and just keep staying the course. I really appreciate you, and I'm sure we'll keep having these conversations and providing the tools. And as you can see in the chat room, there's a lot of thank yous coming in. We appreciate you in the independent sector. And for those that are listening, we will be following up with tools and links to how to stay connected with Swami, because we need her more than any time during this time. So thank you, Swami.